Hello and welcome once again to the slate breakdown for Week 4. I'm Big Italy 42. As you know, he's Denny Carter at CD Carter 13. And we're talking about starting on the London game, if you're playing those slates with the 9:30 Eastern lock there. More power to you. There's no one in this game that I feel like I need to have that's going to change my strategy and forcing in a lineup 3.5 hours early. So what's your take on this? Is there anyone that you feel like you want or need in this one?
No, I see the entire Miami side of the ball as a pretty easy fade. I mean, none of them are priced tremendously low. Tannehill, Miller. The only guy, I mean, if you really like fiending to play a guy from the Dolphins, I would play Rashard Matthews. He's priced outside of the top 50 receivers on DraftKings, and he is also priced pretty low on FanDuel. And I just think he makes for an interesting guy who has produced a lot of fantasy points in garbage time. He seems to be somewhat of a red zone threat as Jordan Cameron really hasn't emerged there. So that's one guy. And then Brandon Marshall on the other side. He's seeing tremendous volume right now. Eric Decker is a maybe for this game. I think it only helps Marshall if Decker is in against the Dolphins. Teams have done a good job of keeping their prime receiver, the number one receiver, away from Brent Grimes, who is the best cornerback for Miami. Marshall is the only guy that I have exposure to in this game.
Yeah, and I'm on board with that. I mean, if for some reason I'm bored at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, maybe I'll enter a couple just to play some Brandon Marshall, or
Yeah.
Eric Decker, like you mentioned in your article here. I mean, he's really, really cheap. So if you just want a cheap little filler, I mean, I won't be doing it, but we'll see. Maybe someone's got their
Yeah.
board.
Decker is super cheap, and if he's a full go, then I do like him. I as a tournament play, no cash games for Decker, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one's going to be a fun one, and we still have no definitive word on Arian Foster, but the Atlanta Falcons against the Houston Texans here. Of course, we've got Julio Jones, Matt Ryan. Hopefully you know who they are by now and how ridiculous. What is it, 46 targets I think Julio's had over the first 3 weeks. Can't imagine the volume's going to change ever at all. And then this is a situation for me, and I'm guessing you're at least in a similar realm of thinking that if Arian Foster plays, I'm absolutely playing because you can't imagine he's less than 100%.
Yeah, I agree. It's apparently it's up to him if he's going to play. It's going to be a late call. I plugged him into a few GPP lineups just in case. We can always make that switch last second. He's playing an Atlanta front seven that was pretty much decimated last week by the Cowboys. I know there's a stat about Joseph Randle only had like 5 yards on his last 11 carries, and I get that. The Falcons basically just stacked the line of scrimmage near the end of that game, and in hopes that Brandon Weeden would throw. So that's a different thing. But with their base defense, I think Arian Foster could really rip this team. I mentioned the slate breakdown. The Falcons are allowing more fantasy production to running backs than any team in the league after last week. So yeah, I like Foster a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the interesting thing about this one is, we've got that great defensive line for Houston, but you point out here they've only got 4 sacks through 3 games. So Matt Ryan should have plenty of time to throw, which was the biggest concern with him the past few years was offensive line not playing well, getting too much pressure, and couldn't get the ball to his playmakers. So one more guy I want to ask you about in this one, Devontae Freeman, obviously kind of the flavor of the week, guy who's never had even remotely close to the performance he had last week. What was it, 2 yards a carry, I think, over the first 2 weeks. So what's your take on him? Deep tournament guy or a guy you're mixing in a decent amount? Or what's your take here?
I don't have him in cash because his price really went up after last week, and rightfully so. I mean, the guy went berserk. But yeah, he was. Last week was not indicative of who he is. I mean, he's not this dominant runner. He's not going to have 33 or 4 touches against Dallas. I can't imagine that's what's going to happen going forward. So I'm fading him mostly because there are guys in his price range, running backs in his price range that I like a little more this Sunday. I will say that my favorite sort of correlation stack from the whole week is in this game. Matt Ryan and Julio, which I know sounds trite at this point, but you put DeAndre Hopkins in there, Vegas expects the Texans to be chasing in this one. We know what happens when the Texans chase, which is Hopkins gets double-digit targets. And there's an interesting stat. Pat Thorman from Pro Football Focus pointed out that Desmond Trufant, who is the shutdown corner for Atlanta, lines up on the left side of the formation 96% of the time, and Hopkins is used in the slot on the right side and the left side. So they can and they probably will keep him away from Trufant. I don't see any reason not to fade Hopkins. I really like him just thrown into the same lineup with Julio and Ryan.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That, I mean, the average player, new players don't look deep into things like that. So that's a huge stat there. The Bills and the Giants is the next one. Obviously, LaShawn McCoy expected to not play in this one. Ty God Taylor going to be a popular play here. And Carlos Williams probably going to be he will be an even more popular play. Fairly priced across the industry. He's averaging, almost 8 yards a carry, and obviously only, I think it's 24 carries so far. But he's looked great even when LaShawn McCoy's in. Now he should see a full workload against a Giants team that, if you look at the numbers this year, it looks like they're good against the run. But this is a similar unit to last year that was terrible against the run. So I'm all aboard Carlos Williams. How about you?
Yeah, I have him plugged into almost every cash lineup just because he's going to see volume. He's priced, at a price point that makes me salivate. Honestly, it's just so low. It allows you freedom on so many levels when you're constructing your lineup. I think he has a very high floor. To speak nothing of his ceiling in this one. But I wrote in the slate breakdown. I mean, the guy is averaging pretty much as a part-time running back. He's averaging 1.7 fantasy points per carry. I mean, that's a ton. That will come down obviously because he's had limited carries. But the Giants' run defense is not bad. They're not great either. And I think that game flow here could be really good for Carlos Williams. Bills are favored by a healthy total, 6-point favorite, 26-point projection from Vegas. So I have him everywhere.
Yeah, and especially with Sammy Watkins, not looking like he's going to play. I don't think anything definitive yet, but certainly going to be relying more on guys like Tyrod Taylor and Carlos Williams in this one. So on the Giants side, though, of course, you've got Odell Beckham Jr., you've got Eli Manning. A stack that people like to play, not a whole lot, but obviously Beckham's got enormous upside, and you've got a good point here where you're talking about how the Bills are expected to be ahead from much of this game, favored by about a touchdown here, so Eli should be airing it out. I mean, they haven't had much of the running game at all this season, so got to expect that there's some big-time tournament appeal for Beckham and Eli.
Yeah, I'm not bearish on OBJ at all this week. I like him a lot, and it's because opponents understand that they're not going to go into a game against Buffalo and run the ball 30 times. I mean, the Buffalo through 3 weeks is seeing 52 pass attempts per game attempted against them. Okay, that leads the league by a long shot. So like I said, it's very much in play that Eli Manning throws the ball 50 times in this game. I don't have the percentage of targets that or target share that OBJ is getting right now, but 50 throws would be at least a dozen targets for OBJ, and anytime you can get that from a guy like OBJ, I really like it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Any opportunity for a guy like that, definitely something I want as much as possible. Next up, we got the Bears and the Raiders. In past years, this will be the opposite kind of script. You'd be expecting the Bears to roll over the Raiders, but much different scenario this year, especially Alshon Jeffrey out and Jay Cutler out. And, this is a Bears defense that's terrible. Oakland's looking like a formidable opponent, especially on the offensive end. You got Derek Carr and Amari Cooper really emerging, Latavius Murray. So there's going to be a lot of Raiders in cash game lineups this week, which seems really weird. You almost wish you just didn't have to see the name Oakland next to it because you just feel awful about it. But, it's hard to argue because they've been great, especially over the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, they're scoring a lot of touchdowns through the air. 77.9% of their touchdowns have been via the pass. But I see Latavius Murray, and it really doesn't – the opponent helps in this one. But pretty much whoever they were playing this week and going forward, I really like Latavius Murray as one of the few safe running backs that we know is going to get volume. He doesn't come out on every passing down like a lot of two down bangers. And then the third part is that he's getting a ton of red zone action. Okay, we saw that last week against Cleveland. So I expect the Raiders, and Vegas expects the Raiders to be ahead in this one. That's great for Murray. I have him and Carlos Williams as a pretty cheap cash game tandem this week, and I don't see many safer running backs for week 4.
Yeah, I actually have that same duo locked into my my FanDuel cash lineup as we speak. Obviously, things could change, but I'm hesitant to change that because this is the perfect week, like you mentioned there. A lot of weeks you want to pay up for, of course, Le'Veon Bell's on Thursday. You've got tough matchups for some of these other guys who we'll get to in a minute, so makes a lot of sense to save with guys with big opportunity. And then on the Bears side here, unfortunately, Jimmy Clausen's the one throwing the football, but it's not a great Raiders defense. I mean, there's some individual talent on this defense, but it's an average at best. I mean, if you're being very generous to them, defense. So Martellus Bennett, you mentioned here, could be a PPR monster. We've seen this before. I mean, many times, obviously more so with Drake Cutler under center like he has been. But when they're behind, when they need big plays, this is the guy they rely on, even when Alshon Jeffrey is in the game. So Martellus Bennett's got a really nice floor this week.
I mean, I know this team is coming apart at the seams, and there's a lot of narrative streak going on with the Bears, and I understand that. But Bennett, he's facing a Raiders team that has linebackers and safeties who are graded by Pro Football Focus as some of the worst in the league in coverage, like bottom barrel. And we saw Crockett Gilmore just dominate linebackers against Oakland a couple weeks ago. And their week 1 opponent, who it's escaping my mind right now, but Eifert. Eifert just ran past people all day.
It was ugly.
Yeah, and so Bennett could be the beneficiary of a blowout, of just lack of options to throw to. Alshon Jeffrey is out again this week, so he has a lot of things going for him. I see him. I wouldn't mind putting him in some tournaments, but I definitely have him in cash games.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, he's a guy, one of the few tight ends. There's not a lot of great tight end targets this week, but one of the few that seems like he has that floor ceiling combination, and it's pretty much game flow. I mean, the game flow is not going to change anything for him because if they're up or down, he's still going to get his targets. And you just can't imagine a scenario where the Bears are up big enough on anyone that they stop throwing the ball, but who knows?
No. Another point about those the Oakland linebackers and coverage, Matt Forte, I think, is kind of a sneaky play. I know he was a disaster last week. Hopefully no one had him. I mean, going up against Seattle with Clausen at quarterback and everything. But, he only had 2 targets last week. I think that'll change. I think that passing game will go through Bennett and it'll go through Forte. So even if Forte doesn't do well on the ground, which he could, I think that he has a really nice PPR floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this next one, you've got some great points about the Chiefs allowing more fantasy points to wide receivers than any other team in the league. We saw Andy Dalton and A.J. Green, especially in the second half last week, just do whatever they felt like doing against the Ravens. This doesn't bode very well for the Chiefs secondary in this one because they're not getting as much pressure on the quarterback as they did before, and I tend to think that should change, but the secondary is definitely the issue here. So as personally as a Bengals fan, it terrifies me to consider Andy Dalton as a cash game option. But, I mean, it's hard to argue with it with everyone healthy. I mean, he looks good.
I mentioned in the slate breakdown that with Marvin Jones lined up opposite A.J. Green, he has Dalton has a better average yards per attempt, better touchdown interception ratio, and better completion percentage. The completion percentage is like 6 points higher, so it's significant. I know Sean Smith is back for Kansas City, right? The cornerback.
I believe so.
I think he's back. I wouldn't let that affect my view of the potential for Cincinnati's passing game in this game. I like the Dalton Green stack, but I really, for GPPs, I really like the Dalton Marvin Jones stack. I think that Jones could see some volume in this game, and like you said, I mean, no secondary is worse than Kansas City's right now. So this could be a bloodbath through the air.
Yeah, absolutely. And then speaking of guys, Yeah, speaking of guys who have pretty nice floors as far as running backs go, this is not an ideal matchup for Jamal Charles. Bengals have been really tough against the run, but as we saw last week especially, game flow really didn't take him out at all. He's a great pass catching back. He's very heavily involved in the offense. I mean, he's obviously the favorite target for Alex Smith, and scored a couple touchdowns when they were down big last week. And whether they're up or down in this one, it's just, in all reality, it probably raises his ceiling if they're down, because then he catches more passes, especially on a full PPR site like DraftKings.
Yeah, I'm not fading him, and thinking that the Bengals will be up in this one. It doesn't really matter. I mean, he's pretty much matchup proof, and it has been for some time. Another guy on Kansas City's side that I like, Travis Kelce, in a Gronkless week like this, it might be good to go in on Kelce. He's running. I was surprised to see, because last year he was only running like 18 or 20 routes a game. He's running 33.3 routes per game through 3 weeks. That's really an indication that his opportunity has skyrocketed in that offense, and they're throwing a lot because they're down a lot. So without Gronk, I don't see any problem with throwing Kelce in your cash game lineups.
Yeah, absolutely there. And then next one, the Colts and the Jaguars, and this one obviously has some injury concerns, but it depends on who you ask, because some people say they're legitimately concerned about Andrew Luck and his shoulder. Other people say they're giving him rest because he's, the franchise player. So obviously if he plays, he's a great play against Jacksonville, who he's dominated. I mean, we saw what Tom Brady and everyone on the Patriots did to this team. But what's your personal take on Andrew Luck? Are you concerned? Are you concerned a little bit? Do you think it's a big concern, or is it just you think he's going to play and it's all just smoke and mirrors?
I have some concern with throwing him into a cash game lineup, thinking that he has the floor that he had last year. Something was wrong last week. You could tell by the way he was playing. The Colts are not going to be forthcoming in how much this is affecting them. I feel like there are like 3 or 4 really good cash game quarterbacks this week, including Aaron Rodgers, we'll talk about later, but who is in that sort of Luck price range. So I don't really see a reason to shoehorn him into lineups.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to put it there. I mean, it's a guy you want in your lineups, but as we've seen the first couple weeks even, I mean, he's been the fourth quarter only kind of guy. He's come back when it mattered, but I mean, he's just not looked good in the first couple quarters of any of these games. So certainly not worried about that. On the Jaguars side, this one's interesting, and we've got Allen Robinson likely matched up with Vontae Davis. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about he loves Allen Robinson, and I said, there's no way in hell I'm playing Allen Robinson this week. Going to see some Vontae Davis, and I mean, the list of receivers I would play that are going to be matched up against Vontae Davis is probably about Antonio Brown and Julio Jones-Long.
Pretty much, yeah. Davis is expected to be on Robinson a lot this week, which makes me like to think about pivoting to Allen Hurns. Yep. On the other side, Hurns did well last week against New England. I don't have how many catches he had, but he did have a touchdown in that one. Saw pretty good volume. And the Colts have been, the Colts secondary has been bad outside of Davis. So if you think that the Jags are going to be down and throwing again in this one, and then there's reason to believe that that'll be the case, then throw Hurns into your lineup. He's very cheap. And I think he has great touchdown potential in this one.
Yeah, and it's a pretty big point spread. So assuming that Luck goes, and he should, then that's definitely what Vegas anticipates too. And you got a point here about the running backs. TJ Yeldon playing a ton of snaps, hasn't been tremendously efficient, but he's getting looks in the passing game as well. So he seems like one of those guys that has an okay floor, but I just don't think he has a huge ceiling. What about you?
No, I don't either. I just Frank Gore, I should mention, is a guy I have a lot, and because I think he could see game script in his favor. We've talked about that before, and his price is still really low, especially on DraftKings. Yeldon is seeing a ton of snaps. He's on the field a lot. I would like to see him get more involved in the passing game. He has 12 targets this season, which is not bad, but it's not something that it's not like Lance Dunbar level. Let's put it that way. So I mentioned Yeldon because his price is very low, and it's just hard to find a guy who's seeing that much backfield action at that low price.
Yeah, that's a great point there. Next up, the Buccaneers and the Panthers. We've seen kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing from the Buccaneers this season. Looked really terrible, then looked pretty good, but that was somewhat a product of the matchup against the Saints, who look even worse than they did. And then you see Cam Newton, of course, on the opposite side, was on all the $1 million winning lineups last week. Has a great floor, as we saw, his huge ceiling as well. Gets goal line carries. Greg Olsen had a monster game last week. So Greg Olsen, in my book, is the top tight end because he gets he had actually as many targets as Gronk so far this season. But I mean, I think there's other viable options where I don't think he's a must play in cash games.
No, like I think that Kelsey and Bennett are also locked in cash game plays, and Olsen is pricey. I mean, when you look at the rest of the tight ends and on the slate this week, but I should mention that the stack generator on Daily Fantasy Cafe has the Newton Olsen stack as the top quarterback tight end stack of the week, and it's not all that close. So that's a very safe stack. I think for GPP purposes, I'm probably if you're intent on getting Cam into a GPP stack, it would be him and Ted Ginn. As weird as that sounds to say, I mean, he's just by default he's seeing volume. So that's I do have that in a couple lineups this week.
Yeah, and then on the Tampa Bay side, Mike Evans saw a ton of targets, saw 17 targets. As we know, he's been a target monster when he's been healthy. He's a guy that's a great red zone threat. I just don't have a ton of faith in Jameis Winston, but at the same time, Luke Kuechly, I'm not sure of his status. I don't think he's probably going to play again this week. I don't know if it's official, but it looks like he's on the wrong side of that as well. And then Josh Norman looked like he was also missed practice a couple days ago. Looks like he's fine, but I don't like picking on the Carolina defense, but I think Mike Evans would be the only guy I'd really consider. How about you?
Yeah, 17 targets is really hard to ignore. He's not going to see that every week. Obviously, no one does. But if you watch that Bucs game from last week, Evans was this close to having one of these 200-yard days. A couple called back on penalties. A couple very close calls down the middle of the field, and if he sees good volume going forward, then it doesn't really matter to me who's covering him. Josh Norman is obviously the top cornerback for Carolina, but no team is tougher against receivers so far this year than Carolina. So I'm torn. I'm really torn on Evans because it's like he's ascending. And he's just going to run into this brick wall in the Carolina secondary. It makes me think he's just a GPP play.
Yeah, and there's been quite a few articles popping up. I saw one that was titled, I'm not sure who wrote it. I want to give credit, but it said, is Josh Norman the next Richard Sherman? And you've seen all these things about next great corner. And I mean, I don't know that I'm going to go there yet. But I mean, he, like you said, he's been tremendous, and the defense has been shutting down receivers. So next up, Washington and Philadelphia. This one looked like it may have concerns with the hurricane coming through. Seems like now rain at worst. Obviously, I'm no weatherman. I just read the things that people tell me on Twitter. So maybe all of it's lies. Who knows? But either way, Eagles with a slightly small favorite here. And this is a tale of two teams that I just don't like either team. I mean, the Eagles looked better last week, at least for one half. Washington has looked better than expected at times this season, but still not good. And I'd be completely fine with not targeting a single player from this game. I don't feel like it's necessary. What if you got to play someone? I mean, who are you looking at in this one?
Yeah, I'm with you there. These are two offenses that pretty much stink. I mean, let's just be blunt about it. By the way, I live about 30 minutes from the Washington Stadium, so I will be updating furiously on Twitter if there is a weather situation tomorrow. I'll try to be the weatherman. But yeah, so for tournaments, if Murray is not a sure thing from what I understand. I mean, he practiced fully, I think, on Friday, which is a good sign. But Ryan Matthews was really solid last week as Murray's replacement. I know Sproles also went nuts. Your boy Sproles.
I love Sproles.
So I don't think that the Eagles should or will ignore that Matthews looks so good. So DeMarco Murray is no longer really an option for me right now until proven otherwise. I think it's just too dicey. Jordan Reed is seeing the sort of volume that you can't really ignore on the tight end side of things. I like Bennett more. They're priced similarly. If I have to go with one, I'm probably going Martellus Bennett this week. And obviously Olsen and Kelsey, I think are above our tier above Reed. But Reed was really week 3 against the Giants. He was very close to having a giant game. I mean, that was not no pun intended.
No pun intended.
But he was real close. I mean, Cousins underthrew him in the end zone. He overthrew him a couple times down the middle of the field. He still managed 9 catches for 96 yards. So yeah, I do have some Reed exposure, but other than that, it's Jordan Matthews a little bit here and there in tournaments, but other than that, I'm staying away.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It seems like the only Murray you want to play in the backfield this week is Latavius, and certainly not DeMarco, even if he goes. But I think that's a good point on your end, though, that why take the chance when you've got a running game that looks fine? I mean, it looks. I mean, I don't know the number 1,000 times better without him. Obviously, it was just a struggle for a few weeks. It's not going to be like that all season. But why take the risk in a game that you should win anyway? Chargers and the Browns next up. An interesting one. Yeah. We've seen Keenan Allen in 2 of 3 games have huge PPR games. Got shut down by the Bengals in between, but huge upside there. I feel like he's going to have a lot of ownership this week, and that's not to say that I think that's bad, but I'll probably see some Joe Hayden. And then interesting play on the opposite side, of course, is going to be Melvin Gordon, who has got a lot of touches, hasn't done a ton with them, but he's looked fine. And, I mean, this is the Browns defense that's allowing the most rushing yards a game so far. So what about Melvin Gordon for you as far as cash game versus GPP?
Gosh, I do have a little bit of Gordon in cash. It's just that, I mean, he's not in the game when they get in the red zone. It's Danny Woodhead. I mean, for whatever reason, the thought is that, Woodhead is the better guy inside the 20 and definitely inside the 10. So if Gordon's going to score, it's probably going to be from outside the red zone, and that's really hard to bank on for me. But yeah, the Browns defense is hemorrhaging rushing yards. We should note that the Chargers offensive line is in shambles right now. And they have injuries all over. I think four offensive linemen were not practicing yesterday, which is a pretty bad sign for their availability on Sunday. So yeah, I do have some Gordon, but I have a lot more Woodhead in this game.
Yeah, and rightfully so. Like you said, I mean, you can get all the yards you want in between the 20s. If you're not getting touchdowns, I mean, then that lowers your floor, lowers your ceiling, and those are the type of players that you can play those in your season-long leagues. But if you're trying to win a GPP or compete in cash games, you're going to need more than 12 carries for 80 yards from your running back.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, next up, Cardinals and the Rams. And as we've seen, the Cardinals looking like one of the best teams in the NFL. We've got the Fitz and Palmer combination, the defense, the special teams. Everything looks tremendous for this team so far. The Rams, quite the opposite. Everyone had some, not everyone, some people were high on them after week 1, beating Seattle, which, it was a kind of a product of some turnovers, good field position, things of that nature. Not making excuses, but, I mean, they played a Pittsburgh defense last week that is not a very good defense. And, I mean, couldn't do anything at all. I mean, didn't even come close to scoring a touchdown.
Yeah, and I read a film breakdown of that game, and typical Jeff Fisher shenanigans. But it was basically the film breakdown showed that the Rams were running into a Pittsburgh stack box constantly in that game, and there was no adjustment at halftime. There was no adjustment before plays by Nick Foles. So this is an offense to target. I think they have no one that scares anyone, right? Yeah. I mean, I know Tavon Austin occasionally breaks one for a long gain or whatever, but they have no scary players on their side of the ball. The Cardinals are very opportunistic, like I mentioned in the slate breakdown. The Rams offensive line is a little leaky. So the Cardinals, the only defense I like better this week is the Broncos. But I really like the Cardinals. If you can get them into your cash lineups, I would. Yeah,
that's who I have slotted in mine as well. I mean, it's really hard to argue. I mean, Nick Foles, we know. I mean, if he's just standing there with no pressure in a practice, he can throw a hell of a deep ball. But I mean, like you said, with no weapons. He just, for some reason, he can't throw passes in the middle of the field. He just never has been good at that, and I'm not touching Nick Foles. I'm not touching this offense. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Cardinals just do what they've been doing recently. And you can see this the Cardinals defense scoring as many points as the Rams offense in this one. It could get ugly quick.
Yeah, I know we talk about this every week, but the John Brown deep ball is coming. Trust me. We talk about, but I mean, I think he's drawn 5 pass interference calls on deep shots over the past 2 weeks alone. 5. Okay, so they're trying. They're really trying to hit that long one. He dropped one in the end zone, which just was a killer. I think I fell off the couch when that happened last week. So I really think that's coming. And then the stack, the Fitzgerald Palmer stack, only takes up 26% of your budget this week on DraftKings. So that's really reasonable for a top end stack like that.
Yeah, especially considering they've hooked up for 5 touchdowns in 2 weeks. I mean, nice high floor. Definitely Fitzgerald certainly looks rejuvenated, like the old Fitz that we all remember. Next up, the Broncos and Vikings. You mentioned loving the Broncos defense, so can't imagine we're going to see a whole lot on the Vikings side. And Adrian Peterson looked tremendous last week. He looked like the Adrian Peterson, the sub 30-year-old Adrian Peterson. But in this matchup, I mean, this Broncos defense, if you ask me, I mean, I think they're the best unit in all of football. They look incredible, and I don't care who it is. I find it hard to play really any skill players against the Broncos from any team right now.
I think that the Broncos defense at home, big favorite in this one, 7-point favorite against a weak arm quarterback like Teddy Bridgewater. I think they will feast on the Vikings. Charles Johnson is out. If that matters, I don't even know if that matters at this point. I imagine that in the Broncos preparations that they've watched a little bit of how this Vikings offense succeeds, and it's only through Adrian Peterson. So I don't have Peterson at all this week. I don't have any Vikings. Like I said in the article, I think that if you can jam the Denver defense into your lineup this week, if you can afford it, do it. I think that they have the highest floor and the highest ceiling for this week. And I think also a little sneaky play, and I know there's a lot of C.J. Anderson hate, and rightfully so. Gary Kubiak said this week, if he's able to stay on the field, we will give him the ball. And so I think that's the best thing that we can hear right now. I mean, as bad as things have been for C.J. Anderson, they've been bad. I think that's hopeful, and it might be reasonable in a GPP format. His price has dropped a lot. I think it might be reasonable to throw Denver's defense and Anderson in there and hope that Anderson gets some clock-killing carries.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. I mean, we saw at the tail end of last year. I mean, he was a pass-catching machine. Peyton Manning trusted him with goal line carries, throws. I mean, he even did a little shovel passes with him, creative ways to get him involved. And so we've seen him be a great playmaker. And I'm on board with you. It's one of those things that kind of scares you. But, I mean, if you're making 10, 15, 20, 30 lineups, whatever it is, maybe even more, I mean, I'm certainly on board with throwing C.J. Anderson in a couple because I know what he's capable of. So maybe people who are new this season to the DFS or fantasy in general, maybe they don't know. But C.J. Anderson, I mean, he's a very talented player. He's just off to a bad start.
Yeah.
All right, 49ers and the Packers. This is one of my favorite GDP defenses outside of the two that we mentioned, of course, because Colin Kaepernick, I mean, he threw 2 pick sixes before his defense saw the field last week. Instantly put his team in a hole. He looked terrible. Of course, you hear the whole, it's my fault, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. If a quarterback looks as bad as he does, you don't need an elite defense to take advantage of that. And the Packers defense has plenty of playmakers in my mind to certainly take advantage of Colin Kaepernick, and see some people with the anecdotal things like, oh, Kaepernick owns the Packers, blah, blah, blah. The Colin Kaepernick I've seen this year doesn't look like he belongs in the NFL.
I think that if they had any viable backup and not Blaine Gabbert, that he would be toast already. So, but I can't imagine that'll happen. But if it does, then he's finished. The Packers are. I think the Packers are one of these high upside, but maybe with a little lower floor than we like for cash games. So I don't have them in cash, but yeah, I do like them a lot. It should be there's a lot of reasons. We could spend an hour talking about the reasons you want to deploy Packers in your lineups this week. But one of them that I found and put in the article, the 49ers are allowing 6.5 yards per play, which is second worst in the NFL. That's a lot. I mean, per play, that's a tremendous number. And we're talking about an efficient Green Bay offense and a ghost of a defense, giving up that much production. There are stacks all over this game. Rodgers, Cobb, Rodgers, James Jones, which is probably my preference price wise. And James Jones is going to see more action going forward with Devontae Adams out.
Yeah, and I mean, and he's looked great. He looks like he didn't miss a beat. He looks like he just never really put on that Raiders uniform, just stayed in Green Bay the entire time. So, yeah, I'm guessing Aaron Rodgers was the one that called him originally to bring him back. He probably said, "I got this one. Well, let me call my buddy James and get him back in here." And I mean, it's certainly paid off. It's adding an extra element to that offense that maybe they didn't need, but they certainly wanted with Jordy Nelson out. And I'm with you here. It's hard to not like all these guys, but it's also not unfathomable to see this game be 28-0 in the second quarter, and we see a ton of James Starks in the second half. I mean, this could go either way. I don't have a whole lot of faith in the 49ers competing in this one.
No, me neither.
Saints and the Cowboys, Sunday night game. Drew Brees now, well, Sean Payton says they're expecting him to play. It's maybe not concrete yet, but obviously the Saints a better team with him in, but they didn't exactly look good with him in either. They've probably been, if you ask me, the most disappointing team in all of football so far. Colts pretty close, but Saints have looked horrible on both ends of the ball. Cowboys, obviously, by really no fault of their own, haven't looked particularly good. Missing Des Bryant and Tony Romo now, but the defense doesn't look good. So something's got to give here. The Saints offense has been terrible. The Cowboys defense looked awful in the second half last week against Atlanta, really for the final three quarters almost. So how much Saints exposure are you going to find in this one? Are you trying to get some, or are you just going to kind of leave it alone, and if they turn it around, they turn it around?
That's what I'm thinking. I think Mark Ingram becomes interesting with Brees back in the lineup. I mean, he's the goal line back. The Dallas front seven was not fantastic to start the year, and then they were just ripped last week. So, Mark Ingram is in some lineups, but not too many. Like I mentioned him earlier, Lance Dunbar really is interesting with Whedon in running that offense or attempting to run that offense. Whedon did not. I think he threw 2 balls over 10 yards in the air last week. I mean, it was some horrendous stat like that. So if you expect him to drop back and pass a lot in this game, which I think is a reasonable expectation, then Dunbar will be part of that. I mean, Dunbar saw 10 targets last week. He caught all 10 for over 100 yards. So PPR on DraftKings, I mean, Dunbar is $3,600. I struggle for GPP purposes. I struggle to keep him out of those lineups.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's not even the first time this season he did. I believe week 1 he had, 8 for 86 or something of that nature. So this wasn't a one-time fluke, and especially with a guy like Brandon Whedon back there, you don't want to check down where you can because it doesn't seem like he even really has the permission to throw it down the field. Maybe if Des Bryant was there, different story. But, I mean, as is, that what's the reason to take shots down the field when you've got guys that can make at least enough plays underneath?
Right.
Next up, last game of the week, Monday night game. And I wish it was a good Monday night game. We've had a couple of them so far, but I don't anticipate this one being a whole lot of fun for anyone who's not playing the Seattle defense or who is not a Seattle Seahawks fan, because that defense last week looked like the terrifying home defense we've seen from them over the past couple of years. The kind of defense you don't play anyone against. You got Calvin Johnson in about as tough of a matchup as you can. And we saw last week, Calvin Johnson looked tremendous. I mean, that catch he made out of Aqib Talib's hands, falling in the opposite direction, absolutely tremendous. But to me, it doesn't matter because Matt Stafford has looked so terrible that it really doesn't matter. You can be the best receiver in the world, and if your quarterback can't throw the ball at least within 10 feet of him because he can get those, then, I mean, it's a no play, and I don't see any way that I play any Lions this week.
Yeah, I see. I get a lot of questions about, are you playing Abdullah this week? And no, I mean, it's just, Theo Riddick is getting a lot of that passing game action, which we expect a lot of this week. So no, the answer across the board is no. Eric Ebron is the only guy that I'm considering on the Detroit side. We saw last week that he could be like a garbage time monster going forward in a really bad offense. He's turned the corner in some way. He's running a lot of pass routes. The Seahawks are allowing 10.87 fantasy points per game to tight ends, so he's the one Lion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like as watching that game last week. I mean, unfortunately for my wife, she's a Lions fan, so we watch all the Lions games. I would have watched it anyway, but I mean, Ebron, like you said, he looks very good, and I was kind of surprised to not see him get more looks from Matt Stafford. But I mean, a lot of that was Denver pass rush, things of that nature. I mean, Stafford has had no time to throw, and he's, I mean, never been a good decision maker to begin with. So he'd rather force it into Calvin Johnson than check it down to Ebron sometimes. So I'm with you there. I mean, Ebron, he looks like he's going to be a great tight end for years to come, but.
Yeah.
Seahawks side, last I heard 50-50 on Lynch playing. What's your exposure to Thomas Rawls here? Outside of DraftKings, of course, because you can always make your late swaps there. How about a site like FanDuel? Are you going to have any exposure to either guy?
No, no, I think it's too risky. I don't know about you, but I think that with 50-50 and Lynch was, late to the game, or his warm-ups took longer than last time, that whole situation is such a mess to me that I would rather just, go Latavius Murray, go Frank Gore, go toward a safer option. But yeah, no, on DraftKings it's different. On DraftKings, I do have a couple lineups where I have Lynch in there now to reserve the space, obviously, and then you switch out for Rawls, and Rawls is supposed to be the guy who gets the carries. I'm not worried about Fred Jackson on that front.
No, not at all. He seems like more of the pass catching back there as well. So thanks for hanging out with us once again there, Denny. I hopefully enjoyed the breakdown, and check us out at DF Cafe. He is at CD Carter 13, and good luck this week, and we'll see you guys next week, week 5.